I still get goosebumps to talk about that one, man. That was a fun one, and Freddie, God bless him, man. He came right up to me as soon as we were done, and big hug, congratulated me, and they got us up on the podium like right after. And I had never popped a bottle of champagne before, and so I remember they gives me a bottle of champagne, and obviously he's been in that position before and spraying that stuff, and he said, just wiggle the cork. And I remember he looks over and we're on the podium and he's like, hand me your ski, wiggle the cork a little bit, one shake, and do not spray me. And I said, yes, sir. and sure enough, the cork.
Hello and welcome back or welcome to the Water Ski Podcast. This is Matteo, your host, and the goal of this podcast remains the same. 92 episodes in is to promote the great sport of water skiing through the people in the sport, people that I enjoy talk to, that share this passion for competitive water skiing and recreational water skiing and judging water skiing, anything that has to do with a sport that is a huge part of my life. Now, for episode 92, I'm releasing the first part of my interview with the great Zack Worden. Zack is one of the most recognizable names in American water skiing, in worldwide jumping. One skier that got to prominence in his event really young and continued to improve at an astonishing rate. One jumper that has a recognizable style, and that due to a variety of circumstances, he's not currently on his jump skis. But that will be more subject matter of part 2. In this part 1, we really talk about his ascendance to, major wins early on in his career, early on for his age. The guy won under 17 worlds at 14 years old, won under 21 worlds at 16 years old, won his first pro tournament before age 20. Zack came through the ranks like a cannonball, really. And we talk about that in this first part. We talk about how he came from wakeboarding to water skiing, and how, despite overall was always part of his journey, how jump became quite quickly the main event, the main passion, the main search, and how the Jack Travers Ski School and first Jack Travers himself was able to influence him and hold the reins, as Zack says, to teach him how to jump properly and towards success. Now, I consider Zack a good friend, and I'm really saddened that we didn't get to talk about his life and his skiing and water skiing, the two of us, before episode 92. But I was in Florida, actually at Jack Travers Ski School in May, and we had a chance to sit down to have a couple of cold ones and unpack his career. Now, I'm really happy to release this part 1, and part 2 will be coming out very shortly. I'm leaving tomorrow to ski the Miami Pro, which is the last stop of the Water Ski Pro Tour. And so I will be releasing these 2 parts while traveling. But rest assured that there's more to come starting next week as well. We're nearing episode 100. I can't even begin how excited I am to share that one. It will be our first video podcast, and I know a lot of you guys are excited for it and are waiting for it. So let's continue to plow ahead. Now, before we start, I want you to know that this episode of the Water Ski Podcast is brought to you by Peace, Love, and Water Skiing. Peace, Love, and Water Skiing is Corey Vaughan's ski school and merchandise brand. Corey has been inspired by the great water ski sites all around the world, So San Gervasio, Lacano, Radar Lake, Swiss Ski School, the boarding school, etc., and has been working to make his site one of the must-visit water ski destinations. And if I may throw in my 2 cents, it is already a must-visit water ski destination. You can receive coaching from Corey Vaughan himself and Mike Kuziak on a wind-protected, man-made lake with a new Mastercraft Pro Star. Add to that, new lodging facilities right on the water, a loaded pro shop, a full line of radar demos, all on hundreds of acres of beautiful Virginia countryside, and you may just think you've gone to water ski heaven. And actually, I have a dear friend of ours here at Jolly that skis with us regularly, and she went to visit Corey in May and was completely like surprised of how good the site is, the quality of the skiing, and obviously the whole experience with Corey and Amelia sharing the site with them for a week. So highly recommend the trip. The ski season in Bampas is from April 1st to November 1st. So it's a good time to start thinking about lining up for a trip for next spring. Also, listeners of the Waterski podcast can enjoy 10% off on all merchandise in Corey's online store by entering the code TWSP, all caps. So go to peaceloveandwaterskiing.com to learn more about the ski school, and you can get 10% off any Peace Love and Waterskiing gear. So again, peaceloveandwaterskiing.com, TWSP, all caps, at checkout. All right, here we are. Let's jump into the first part of my interview with Zack. Enjoy, and see you very shortly for part 2. All right, we're ready. Good?
Let's do it, man.
Zack, welcome to the Waterski podcast, my friend.
It's good to be here, brother.
Episode 92. Crazy to think that it took so long for us to get together and have a little chat.
Yeah.
Before I ask you the usual question, just what have you been up to recently?
Man, I haven't been as involved in the ski world as I typically would have been over the last at least year and a half. I took a pretty big position with a commercial builder in Orlando, which has really taken up a majority of my 9-to-5 time during the week, and I do miss it, but at the same time, I love where my career is headed, and I love building and working and seeing progression and day-to-day results, and construction is a great field for that. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoy my job and excited to see where it takes me. And, after I get a little more grounded with this, I'm hoping to be able to kind of revert back and step back into the ski scene a little bit more and be a little more involved than I used to be.
Yep.
But it's been a lot of learning over the last year and a half, and a lot of things went down, and so taking it one day at a time at this point, but really enjoying where I'm at in life right now.
Sweet. And it's funny because we're going to circle back to that probably towards the end.
Yep.
But starting from the beginning,
yep.
How did you get into water skiing?
My grandfather was a Mastercraft driver for years. My mom was a very accomplished skier all through juniors and up and through college into Women's 1, Women's 2. And it just made sense to have me on the water. My first time, I was 2 years old. My grandfather lived on the lake. He was a Mastercraft rep, so he had a new boat every year. It was always a big deal for me. He'd let me pick the colors out, even starting at a very young age. And looking back on it, I only ever got to choose between blue or red. But,
okay.
But we did had a new Mastercraft on the lake every year, and they lived on the other side of the lake from us. It was a public lake, but basically it was private, just us. And so we were able to, I'd go there after school. He'd drop me off and then bring me back over to my parents when they got home from work, and everything revolved around the lake, and that's where it took off at. It started with a little bit of wakeboarding and tubing and kneeboarding and just disking and anything out on the water that I could do, and then it transformed into my 3-event career, probably around the 5-6 age bracket there.
So yeah, you're one of those that started super early. Before you sort of, let's just say, specialized into tournament skiing, What are some of the memories you have in? I know it's early because you're like 4 or 5, but anything that stands to mind thinking back? An episode?
I remember I had my first get up that I had. My grandparents had gotten me a new wetsuit, and on that wetsuit it was all the Snoopy characters, Charlie
Yep.
Brown, Snoopy. You know, the whole get up, and I had matching yellow skis with stickers on them, and I remember it very vividly. Learning how to ski on those skis, and I think that would have probably been around the 4 or the 5 ballpark. My grandpa on 4th of July every year made sure that he took me a whole lap around our entire lake system and our chain of lakes that we lived on, holding an American flag kind of for 4th of July.
Nice.
From my earliest memory of that. And, early on, I always loved skiing, 3-event skiing, but I enjoyed building different skis and wakeboards, and I'd always, I remember we bought a pair of old snow skis at a garage sale so that I could duct tape shoes onto them and try to ski. And my dad would entertain me, and my grandpa would entertain me for hours on end, even though I could never even get up on these things, but just trying to entertain the idea to ski on something different. I'm being top of the water on whatever contraption that I had come up with from the time I got home from school to when my dad got home from work. Whatever 2 hours I had there, whatever I came up with, he was there to pull me. And
that's cool.
A lot of fun on the water to really start my career and start what ended up being my 3-event side of stuff.
And I know, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but knowing you and your personality and who you are in the sport doesn't surprise me that those were your beginnings, like whatever happened, just good fun, So then you transition into tournament skiing. Was it serious training from the beginning, blah, 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 or kind of natural?
No, it was my parents let me feel it out. I was involved in Little League sports, around my town. I played football, I played baseball. They let me test the water, so to speak, no pun intended. Yep. But, I wakeboarded for a while and actually had a pretty promising start to wakeboarding. If you guys know the Sovin brothers and stuff, their father was actually my pediatrician growing up, and he already kind of navigated the amateur wakeboard scene back in the mid-90s, and so he kind of gave us guidance what tournaments to go to and what liquid force rep to talk to try to get a board. And so I had a nice liquid force board, performance ski and surf, custom made my Wiley boots for my wakeboard, and I rode in quite a few events and won some good wakeboard events at a young age. I'm 7-8 years old, but it was at that same time where I was playing football, I was trying to do baseball, I was wakeboarding, and I was trying to get into 3-event skiing. And my parents only really knew how to coach me and guide me in 3-event skiing. Yeah. And that's where I started to excel at quickly versus everything else I was involved with. And I think the writing was kind of on the wall. That's kind of where I was going to go, but I wasn't really pushed. I tested the waters everywhere I could, and had some good success in other places. But, skiing is what my family knew and knew how to help me grow into who I ended up becoming. But, that's ended up kind of where I routed to. By the time I was 10, it was pretty much full dedicated to traditional 3-event.
Yeah, which makes sense. Might have not even been a push necessarily, but just the fact that they knew how to help you better. You saw the performances, and when you're little, performances are addictive, right? Like you get the little placement, the medal, I can see that. But staying with wakeboarding for a second, you're 3 years younger than me. Yeah. We grew up skiing in a moment when we were kids when wakeboarding was taking off.
Yes.
And I can confess to you that I've been tempted, even by other club members, to consider maybe, why don't I do that? Yeah. Did you get that temptation afterwards?
I think the scene, when we were at mid-90s on the local, especially here in Central Florida, that was really blowing up. Yeah. And everything was driven towards this wakeboarding, and I knew how to do it, but I was still naive in the sense where I didn't know the history of what water skiing kind of once was back on its tour days. So I didn't know what to expect at the pro level at that time, and nor did I see it on the wakeboarding side. So I was just kind of blinded and just kind of went through and skiing. And then it probably wasn't until I was, later on 10 or 13 that I actually looked back and said, man, if I would have pushed wakeboarding 4 years ago, I'm looking at the Sovin brothers that are now sponsored and, they're getting advertised and seeing mini clips on commercials for, OWC. And I'm like, me and this guy competed to get against each other, and I beat him at a couple events, and, we're the same exact age, and I kind of saw his stardom, but I wasn't quite there in my professional skiing career yet. So there was a moment there, my early teens, that I was, I could probably go back over to wakeboarding, or maybe I should have. I had maybe a little buyer's remorse, but I think that was a small scale.
Okay.
It definitely crossed my mind, though.
No, I did mine too.
Especially here in Central Florida.
Because at home, like I would say, like late 90s, early 2000s, we started having club members that asked my coach to put the tower and to put more weight in the boat and more weight in the boat and more weight in the boat. And they were on the same lake, right? So like, come on, join, like kind of a little bit of a tempting drawing me to them. And I had thought about it, but then I guess I was already, I don't know if it was your experience, but I was already launched into this other thing that I said, okay, maybe I just stick to this and try to do this hard,
Yeah, at that point I was pretty well committed to 2-3 event skiing. At that point I was spending every summer at Jack Travers Ski School, full time, getting ready to transition into online school to be able to really train. At that point, I was too committed to 3 event with too much uncertainty on the other side to say, oh yeah, no, now I'm gonna go try this other one that I stopped doing 5-6 years ago. But
right.
I'm glad. I'm so glad that I stuck with where I did, and I think my life would have taken a much different route. I'm very happy with where I'm at now, and I'm glad I chose the path that I did when I was 9 or 10.
Right,
even though it's tough to say that you were 9 or 10 making a decision. For now I'm 31. It's
it's
but
different.
But I'm happy I went the route I did.
All right, so you're there, 3 events skiing. What you're obviously very well known as a jumper, but you were a very prolific overall skier. Was it jump already, like right away, the one that you felt the quickest progression, the most talented, or was it? How were the early tournament days?
Early tournament days, and this goes back to I'd say from 6 or 7 years old through 9 years old, kind of a little 2-3 year span. Tricks actually started off as my best event, mainly because I had the wakeboard background, is where I wanted to mess around. We had a Skylon and a fat sack, and so tricking I took to at least doing hands. I never was good at toes, but I could put down a really pretty decent hand run, and I was good at hands. Slalom, I loved the speed of slalom and the intensity and the G-force out of getting across course, and so that's what slalom really started to take off. And I had some good guidance. My dad was a decent slalom skier, a weekend warrior, but he could guide me in slalom. And jumping from where my mom used to jump at was, the no helmet days. Arm sling was an afterthought at times. A very different style of jumping to what I was getting ready to be introduced to.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of got put in at Jack's to learn how to jump. And Jack took me under his wing and had this whole process of how we're going to go over the ramp the first time, and we started going over the corner. And I was already a really good skier by any means on the water and comfortable on the water. I just wanted to go off the top of the ramp, and Jack kind of held back the reins for a while and made me go over the corner and appreciate the beast that jumping is. And I think the first time I went over the ramp, actually, I know the first time I went over the ramp, I had Chris Travers in the boat.
Yeah.
And Jack wasn't around for my set that morning. And I'd been telling Chris where I was at, and he said, "I think you're ready to go over the top." I said, "Absolutely, I'm ready. I've been asking for this for a couple weeks now, and Jack's been holding me back and telling me to, just take my time." And Chris was probably in his early 20s at the time, maybe late teens, and we went over here to the North Lake.
Yep.
We still had a ramp on that lake, and I made it about 5 feet up the ramp, slipped out on my side, flipped off the top. Came up laughing, loving it. Said, "Pick me up." I tried again. I landed my very next one, and I think that was the next set I took with Jack. I had to tell him that, "Oh yeah, by the way, yesterday Chris took me over the top of the ramp," and that was all she wrote. After that, man, I got the bug really bad for jump, and I was, Leilani was always good about checking my sets. Like, okay, make sure you had at least one trick set, one slalom set, and I'll allow you to have 2 jump sets, and then. She'd come in and check on me at the end of the day. We were having dinner, and she'd asked about my sets, and I'd say, "Well, I had 3 jump sets and 1 slalom set." And then, you gotta remember you're an overall skier, and I stuck with it for a long time. But they had to do everything they could to try to keep me off the ramp.
Yeah, and I think you gave a good description because, by the way, we're recording this at Jack's, and I've been here for 3 weeks with 3 junior skiers for the Masters. And I do see the many checking points that are here, right? So Jack might not say much, but he's looking over what you're doing. Leilani is the one asking you questions. Chris is the one organizing everything. You know, walk us through how it was for you, as you started spending summers here and eventually, longer periods of times.
Some of my earliest memories at Jack's were. The days after school, my dad would pick me up from school, and we'd get out. We lived an hour and 15 minutes away.
Oh wow!
And so my dad picked me up from school, take off work early, and we wouldn't get out to Jack's until almost 4 p.m. At the earliest, and we would try to cram in a couple sets before it got dark, and drive home. But in my earliest memories is really in a huge time at Jack's when Brandy Hunt was a really prolific skier here. Skiing all the time. Ronnie Barton was on site all the time. There was a bunch of at the junior clinics going on. I remember all these, under 17 junior skiers. Here I am. I'm like an 7, 8-year-old, but these team camps are coming down, and I'm watching them ski these team camps with all, Michael McCormick would come in to coach, and, Jack was here, and Jack had coached Sammy, which, to this day is still, one of my idols, even back then was still, prominent on the scene and was my idol. And so just being surrounded around greatness the whole time, it was kind of a no-brainer. I'd come over here and I'd put in work. My dad drive me. We drive an hour and 15 minutes, do homework on the way, pound out 3 sets real quick, finish up whatever homework I had to do. We'd get home at 9, 10 o'clock at night, straight to bed, school the next day. And we would come out on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. And then sometimes on Fridays he'd drop me off. I'd ski all weekend. And then, JT was my best friend. So, we're only separated by a few years, so we were really inseparable.
Yep.
And I wouldn't come on Tuesdays and Thursdays to Jack's because JT might have had detention in school on one of those days. So we just stopped coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays because I'd be bummed if I got over here and then I found out when I got here that John had to stay at school for an extra hour and a half because he had, he was John.
Right.
So,
right.
But no, it was great. And then that just kind of snowball effect into every spring break, every Thanksgiving break, winter break, anytime I had an extended amount of time off from school, I straight to Jack's, Leilani, a second mother to me, like no other, grew up in that, back there in the boys' room.
Yep.
And I got my name signed on a lot of those bunk beds that are, that were here 20 years ago when I first started coming. And, but just every weekend, if it was a tournament or just, it was surrounded by people that were so encouraged to make you a better skier, to make themselves a better skier, and it didn't really feel like work or training. It didn't feel like I was going to batting practice, or if I was going to football and running suicide drills. I was just going there to ski like other people, but I really started to excel quickly just with the mentality of everybody around the lake.
Yeah. So no, definitely this is one of the few environments that there are where, you know, you're surrounded by so many great skiers from all around the world. So there's always something to learn that you might have not heard, you know, something new that you saw and you might try to apply. So definitely you were in a exceptional environment to become a great skier. I'm going to ask you a tough question though. Do you feel you were talented? Because obviously if you pair talent with great environment, then you're, you know.
Looking back on, if you asked me that question now, I would say yes. You know, I think I had a knack for it. I had a mental capacity to understand it. At that age, I had no clue. I was very naive to where I was on the level playing field of everybody else in the world.
Yeah.
You know, we had our bubble. I don't want to call it a bubble here. I was still exposed to a lot, but you know, at Jack's, if I was a junior, but I was getting the 32 off, I still had. You know, I remember Patrice Martin was, you know, getting through 39 out here, and I was just mind blown about it. And so for me, 1 or 2 at 32 off at a slower speed, that's not that great. You know, I could do better than that.
Right.
You know, look at what Patrice is doing. Rewinding, you know, I was an 8-year-old getting into 32, and I didn't realize, you know, where that was going to take me, and kind of that was actually a really, you know, a good score for that age. But I think I was blessed to have a natural ability to it and liking to it, and at least in jump and slalom. Tricking took me a lot of time, toes in particular, to wrap my head around it and try to tone it down. And I was, you know, like any young boy, I was easily frustrated with something that I couldn't figure out right away. And tricking was my Achilles heel as an overall skier. But, you know, I did really love slalom and the speed of slalom. I love the risk factor and the unknown of jump and the feeling it provides when it's successful.
Yep.
And I think to this day, anything I do in life, I love that slight fear of unknown, and then seeing it come to fruition and you know, just explode in front of you. I love that. But looking back on it, I was blessed with some good genes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then I was also paired with an amazing supporting, you know, cast member, you know, with growing up with people like JT and the Travers family, and then my family having the background in skiing. It was a recipe for success at a young age, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, because I think obviously I asked you this question because in the very little that you said, it was clear that social support and coaching and how can I say, like facility where to train, those were on spot.
Yes.
So you pair that with a bit of natural talent and a good motivation, and there you have a tremendous athlete, right? Yeah. I guess when was... So I find it very interesting, the story that, you know, you went upside down your first jump like anyone else in this world, and the first thing you said, let's go again, right? I don't know that everyone would react like that, let's say. Some would. When did you start feeling that the jumping was, you know, you were starting to understand it, you were starting to get pretty good, despite you might have had people jumping 200 here and you were looking up to them? When did you start feeling that you were, you know, jumping well?
I think when, you know, I grew up and I was always the younger kid in the group. I grew up with, you know, a lot of guys around your age that had me by 3 or 4 years. And as a young kid, from where you are at 10, 11, 12 maybe to where you are at 14 or 15.
Huge.
There's a lot of things that take place. A lot of muscle gets built on, and you know, start excelling. So I was living day to day at this time at Jack's. I was here every summer, 3 days a week, all winter, surrounded with people that are about 4 years older than me. So I could still relate to them mentally,
Yeah.
but physically they were just bigger and stronger and jumping further than I was. And I was starting to be able to compete, even though I was, smaller and still not gone through puberty all the way yet.
Yeah.
I was still a tiny little kid, but I was starting to compete with them. And I was like, man, I think I'm actually getting the hang of this. And I was taking really well to coaching. And a lot of that goes back to Jack and Chris, and the environment was, I had a really good concept of body awareness. And if they would tell me to do something and they related super well to the style that I was being taught in, that, I could identify, hey, your right ski's getting behind in your turn. Even at 10, I was like, I know exactly what this guy's talking about. I know how to fix that. And
Wow.
I was able to make quick adjustments on the fly. And with jumping, like any young age, all of a sudden nowadays, we have a 1 foot PB, or I finally got, I got the 3 ball at 41, it's something like that. Well, back in that day, it was like you would have a full pass PB, or you would have a 15-foot PB in jump. And I think that's what my skill and where I was progressing, and then the constant affirmation that I was reaching these goals and I was having a new PB every month, whether it be a foot or 15 feet, and every season I was improving. That's what, at that age, I didn't know that was ever going to end.
Yeah.
It did eventually, but, that's what kept me just grabbing at it. And I don't think I really, all the way until I officially kind of went pro and started skiing 6 foot, that I ever stopped just striving. I finally hit the plateau, or I got to the 230s.
Yeah.
And at that time, 230 was still a big jump, but I kind of hit that mark. I was like, oh crap, I think I made it.
Yeah.
But it was always an uphill battle, and being surrounded by greatness and great coaching and like-minded people who love to do what we do. It really helped me progress quickly in the sport.
Yeah. What, I guess, as you were starting, to take cuts at it when you were, I don't know, like 12, 13, you were starting to really trying to look for a lot of speed, double cutting, did you ever have moments of fear?
I went through a couple cases of I guess we call it passitis.
Passitis, yeah.
And I couldn't get myself over the ramp, and I couldn't figure out why I had this urge to pass at the very last second. I wasn't late. I wasn't too early. I wasn't in a bad body position. But I remember one summer going into nationals. We had nationals in Texas. I would have been, I want to say 12 years old, right around Boys 2.
Yeah.
And, or what used to be Boys 2. And I went out there and I practiced like 4 times before nationals, and I passed every single practice round. And I had this mental meltdown of where I was at. And my biggest fear was not knowing why I was having this mental block of getting over the ramp. And I ended up competing. I won nationals that year. I was a little bit of an underdog. We had another gentleman that had just broken the record, was a good 10 to 15 feet better jumper than I was. And I went out there and just did what I knew how to do. I ended up winning nationals. And I think kind of over that short little window that was all crammed into, I learned a lot in that point in time. And after that, I wouldn't say necessarily scared now, but different conditions, or I started traveling to that, junior worlds in France where we just had some really gnarly conditions, make you pucker a little bit. And that was a little bit scarier of a scene. But was I ever scared to attack the ramp? Not after I figured out that mentally I'm strong enough to be on the water. After I got that and I was committed to it, then I was good to go.
Yeah, and that's, ignorantly, that's what I would have said about you, I would have, fear doesn't cross my mind when I visualize you jumping,
Yeah.
Okay. So because I remember right around, well, I don't know the categories in the US, but like say 14 to 16 years old, that's when you're jumping to cough to another level,
Yeah.
right? Can you pinpoint something, or was it just like continuing to those big PBs like you were when you were younger?
When I first moved, so on a small junior level, boys 2, we're going 28 miles an hour, 5-foot ramp.
Yeah.
I had set the national record, and I think I'd beat the previous record by 12 or 13 feet. Pretty considerable amount when I brought it up to, it was, I set it at 131, and it later got broken and stuff. But I had first moved into boys 3 and gone up to 32 miles an hour, and I didn't have great success my first year. And I was still, at the time, I was a smaller kid. I hadn't really filled out yet, and Jack had insisted that I stay at 5 foot for my first year of boys 3 at 32 miles an hour. And I was really torn with his decision to do that because I wanted to go 5.5. I'm old enough to go 5.5 now. I can go far. I have my rating to go 5.5. And Jack made me sit an entire season at 5 foot. And I think that's when everything clicked in my style. And I came into who I was as a jumper, the way I wanted to ski. And I basically, for lack of a better terms, I spent an entire year not making the podium at any events because I was hindered by this 5 foot. But what it was doing is I was learning how to ride my skis better. I was learning technique. I was learning all this stuff that when applied right at 5.5, I would have tremendous success. So fast forward to year 2 in boys 3, Jack allowed me to take the ramp up to 5.5 over the course of a month, leading up to my April tournaments. And I think over the course of that month, from year 1, I want to say around 150, 155.
Yeah.
My first year at 32 5 foot. And then I think I was up into the 180s the very next year.
What?
And at that point, boys 3, that's
huge.
That was a solid 10 feet ahead of everybody else. And I really attribute all that to staying at 5 foot for as long as I did. And if I fast forward a couple more years, I did the same thing with 6 foot. And I really hesitated to get into it, even though I was well qualified. I had been skiing some tournaments. Even though I was still a junior, I was going up and skiing open at various events and tournaments, just getting some scores at 35 miles an hour and having really good success at 5.5. But I held back for it wasn't a full year this time. I held back a good 6 months though. And then creeped into 6 foot, and then had really good success right away again because I retaught myself how to jump when being applied to what needed to be a 6 foot ramp.
Yeah,
it's a whole different animal going from 5 to 5.5 to 6 foot, and that got instilled in me on how to do that back when I was 12.
Yeah,
so props to Jax for keeping me at 5 foot. It pissed me off royally. Even my dad, I think, was like, how come coach won't let us go 5.5 yet? My dad didn't know jump, you know?
Right.
So it was, but then in hindsight, all of a sudden I packed on those pounds. I kind of went through this transformation as a 13, 14-year-old boy. And then that second year, I was going 180s. I broke the national record, which had, been there for a long time. I broke that record the very start of my third year, and then by the end of my third year, I was going pro, but I was going pro at 5.5.
That's crazy.
And that was that big jump you talked about. But I think that all goes back to Jack keeping me grounded for as long as he could.
Staying there for a second, I guess in that year, like a double for the question, what did you learn about jump by staying at 5 foot, and what did you learn about coaching through you struggling with that emotion, because I'm sure so many times you wanted to go 5.5 and Jack was like, no.
I think I learned I learned the importance of what a coach is. around then. Before, it was simple direction to counter rotate or explaining that in a different way that I understood, or, hey, try to get your skis a little wider or make them a little narrower.
Yeah.
Kind of basic tips, but it wasn't until I really understood what coaching is all about until my coach kind of, you can imagine the barking dog at the door on a leash, and not wanting to let him out, not wanting to let him out, and then all of a sudden, letting go of that leash and letting him run at the right point in time.
Yeah.
And that's when I understood the brilliance that Jack had. That he got me on bigger skis early on.
Yeah.
You're going to learn how to ride bigger skis because it might not necessarily be a great idea right now. And a lot of people looked at me, and I was riding skis that were probably 8-10 inches too big for me by industry standards. But Jack said, trust the process, and coaching wise, trusting your coach and putting 100% of faith into their knowledge and their experience, it paid dividends for me. And so fast forward to when I was coaching and, working with some junior skiers and stuff, it was fun to just trust me, give it a month. If it doesn't work in a month, we'll go back to the drawing board and we can try something together. But 9 times out of 10, fast forward a month and things were clicking like they should be.
Yeah.
And that's what's fun about, I love coaching junior skiers because they get to see the progression. As a coach, you get to see the progression and see something building on a daily basis. Maybe as a pro, it's more season to season.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, Zach came back this year. He's going a little bit further this year, but it was, Zach all of a sudden skied states, and then by regionals, I already gotten 10 feet better. And by nationals, I had gotten another 5 feet better. I was constantly improving, and I love seeing that with juniors because their reaction, that's what fed me as a junior, and I know that's what's going to feed them, to progress on later in their skiing career.
Yeah. It's a fun thing, and I think it's always interesting how you build trust, right?
Yeah.
How did Jack do that? Like, was it just you knew that he was this sort of guru figure and you just would ride with him, or was it some of the behaviors, the things he would say?
I knew who Jack was. I knew who Jack had coached, but I didn't necessarily relate to Jack in this. I didn't put Jack way up on this big pedestal where I was, Jack brought himself down off the pedestal to our level and made everything so relatable and fun. And anyone who knows Jack, he's a man of a few words, but when he does speak, it's best to open up your ears and pay attention to what he's saying. And, a great example of his coaching style, and I love to use metaphors like this, is at the time at Jack's, I was this little kid and I had this motorized scooter. Mm-hmm. And I'd ride around the site, and it was old school. You had to pull start it like you were pull starting a chainsaw. In slalom, I could not grasp the concept of what counter rotating was, opening up my chest down the lake. And Jack gave me this little tip. He's like, I want you to feel like every time that you let that hand off the handle to go around the buoy, I want you to feel like you're starting up that go ped of yours. And for the life of me, I was like, that is ridiculous to tell somebody that. I don't know what he's saying. I was like, I'll try it. And he called me on my BS. I didn't think about it at all the next pass. And he goes, you didn't do it. I said, well, I kind of questioned him on it. And then all of a sudden, okay, I'll try it. And I thought about just over-exaggerating this motion. And I ran one of the most beautiful passes at one of my hardest line lengths at the time right away. And I was like, okay, maybe I should start
listening
maybe
to this
I should start, honing in on that a little bit more. And Jack was just super soft-spoken, communicative, he was very good at communicating. You drop it in the lake, and it wasn't a question of how'd that feel. It was like, he just says, kind of look at you, and you could tell a lot by a man with a mustache and the way that he just kind of looked at you, and you knew if you did it right. We always joked about if you got a fist pump from Jack, because if Jack was driving or Jack was on the shore or coaching you jump or at the end of the lake, and you'd see him, and he'd give you the little Tiger
Yeah.
Woods fist bump right there. And if you got that out of Jack, that was a lot of emotion from him.
Yeah.
And so that was always something that we always strive for, is we drop at the end of the lake, and if Jack came up and you came around 6-ball and out the gates, and you could see his hand come up off the throttle, give you a little fist pump, and then whip you out for your drop, you knew that you had done it right.
Yeah.
And so that was little things like that we strive to achieve. And so his little words that he would speak and his little coaching tips, they would go so far.
Yeah, just because you were properly timed
Yeah.
from someone that doesn't say much.
Yeah.
So whenever they speak or they act in a certain way, you learn to pay attention, and when you do, you know that it sort of works. Right?
Yeah, man. A lot of us now in our pro days, we'll sit down and we'll theorize about skiing and styles and settings and what we could be doing, and we'll have 3-hour conversations. Jack was never, you never sat down and had these long theoretical conversations with him. They were just, like you said, super short, to the point. And when Jack spoke, you needed to listen and do your very best with all your ability to apply it, and the results speak for themselves. And so that's the same way I like to coach. It's the same way I was brought up coaching with Jack, and had good success with it. And it's a very soft-spoken man that, his words go a long ways.
Yeah, and I must say that, having been here for a while, I am observing more and more how he coaches. He's not in the boat as much, obviously, but like he's on the shore for some jumpers, and I see him talk to some skiers.
Yep.
And I noticed that, like, I'm trying to learn now that this is my profession full time. I'm trying to learn for as many as I could. All right, so I brought up that 14 to 16 because I would imagine right around that time you represented the United States at some Pan Ams or Worlds or so. Like, I've asked other skiers, how was that experience?
I never forget the very first one. We went to Moissac, France.
Yep.
I qualified for the Junior Worlds in 2006. Was it 6? It might have been earlier than that.
Okay. 6 probably, because 4 was here.
4 was here, and it was the very next Worlds in France. And I had made the junior team as an overall skier. Jump and slalom were basically my 2 events. We had some other really good trickers on the team with Adam Picos and stuff like that. But that was the first time that I had a team tracksuit. That was the first time that I had ever walked through an opening ceremonies. That was my first time, standing behind the person holding your flag as you walk through the town, and they set up a beautiful little presentation for us. And I was very proud to be there and wearing the suit that I was and representing my country. And that was the first time that I had the opportunity to ski for a team. Okay. And it wasn't my individual performance. Or, we have our all-stars team growing up, where in the U.S. we have our different regions competing against each other, but it doesn't hold a ton of weight. You're all skiing in France and going overseas and getting the recognition as if, you were these, gods out there. We're some junior skiers, we're good skiers, but, they've sold it to, I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And I was like, man, I love this.
Especially because, like, one of the things I don't think I've ever talked about with, guests from the US who I've asked the same question is, I've represented Italy. Some people represent their own country, but the U.S. is clearly seen as the country of water skiing. Yeah. Like, that's where water skiers are. That's where you go to train in the winter. That's where the skis are built, the boats are made, the best sites are. So I don't know. It almost feels like it represents something more than just skiing against other countries.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. I mean, there's almost a reputation that you have to uphold skiing for the U.S. because everything is almost provided for you. Like, Granted, I did have to drive an hour after school every day to be at a training facility. I wasn't flying from Italy. I wasn't flying from these, coming down from Canada or, somewhere where they can only ski 5 months out. I grew up in Central Florida.
Yeah.
And so it was almost, we almost have the added pressure of having to perform because everything is at our fingertips. And so when you do get the recognition to be on that team and represent the U.S., it feels more solid in the fact that was expected of you almost because you have all this at your fingertips. And so making that team and being represented and being at that level for a U.S. skier really, really hits home.
Yeah, yeah. So you show up to Mazak, Junior Worlds. What are your expectations? What are your thoughts? What were your goals?
So growing up, I mean, I had skied all around at that point I had skied around the U.S. pretty well. But I had skied at West Palms. I had skied at Bakersfields. I had skied at all around Florida, the Pecos. I never really skied on a tournament open body of water in front of a fanfare outside of just the people that were fans because they were moms, dads, and grandparents on the sides, on the banks. That's what I was accustomed to. And I had watched my dad had taken me out to the Swiss Worlds, and that was the first time I was introduced to a proper stage, a performance, like just people lined up and down the shores. France, for me, took that to an entire new level because this was international people that I knew had no relation to skiing, but there was something going on in that town. There was a buzz about it, and they had to be there to watch it.
Yeah.
They were actually, it's me going to a NASCAR event and sitting on the sidelines or going to a football game to watch someone do something that I think is just really awesome. So they came there to watch us ski, and we were on this open body of water in a country that my English was tough. We weren't in Paris where we can get by with a lot of English. We were on the outskirts, and so English didn't take us as far as maybe we had hoped. And we had training and the conditions. It was a windy, open body of water on a river that had some current, and that was the first time that I'd ever faced adversity on the water outside of maybe a stronger wind than I would like.
Okay.
And I was going up against some other guys who were kind of accustomed to that, and they had grown up in that scene where with the different countries they had the opportunity to travel earlier on in their careers, and I was really intimidated. But in that same sense, I was extremely motivated. Again, maybe trying to be this proud American skier that I could still hang with this. And I skied respectably.
Yeah.
I did win jump. I skied well in slalom, and I tricked well. I did well for my team, and we won a gold medal for our team. So all said and done, it worked out great. But I mean that was the first time. There was 13 junior skiers there. 6 were on the team, and we had 13 total with 7 independents. And then our crew was like 40 deep because everyone's parents came. It was the first time that all 13 of us had the chance to travel really internationally representing the U.S. And so it had chewed up and spit out quite a few of our skiers. And, we weren't trained to go in a public body of water and compete. And I think me skiing well there kind of maybe set my tone for now I can compete with anybody anywhere, kind of deal. And that was really cool, and that kind of snowball effect in me wanting to travel and pro tour and not really caring so much about conditions and more so wanting to put on a show and being the best on the water that day regardless of what we were up against.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Like, it doesn't surprise me when you say that you, the independents, the team, it was probably their first time traveling abroad. Because truth to be told, it's not really easy to travel abroad if you're in the US. Like, the space from from Florida to California in Europe, you can cross 12 countries,
Yeah.
you know? So for us, I guess it's a little easier and we're more accustomed to you show up, they don't speak your language, you know, like how you going to get dinner,
Yeah.
you know, what's the way to get there, you know, like it's easy to get exposed to that, you know? But I find it cool how through skiing, you know, US skiers get to experience that, you know, because it's not common.
No, and I don't think it's common in the U.S. at all, regardless of what sport you play. The U.S. is, we're a little too much about ourselves.
Yep.
You know, you look at our National Football League, you know, we call ourselves world champs at the end of the year, but there's 32 teams all based in the U.S.
Right.
You know, so I was very fortunate and spoiled to, at a young age, be able to travel and be exposed to culture.
Yep.
I'd already been exposed to culture here at Jack's growing up around people that were international all the time, which was already, you know, I'd go back to school and say, oh yeah, you know, one of my best friends that I live in the boys' room with, he's from Colombia, or
Yeah, right.
you know, I got a buddy from France, or you know, people didn't have those stories at school,
Yeah.
and you know, going through school, for me, it was a 9-to-5 job. I clocked in, clocked out. And I didn't do any of the homecomings or any of the school activities. I was straight to the lake and, you know, was immersing myself with as much as I could. And then to be a U.S. skier for the first time traveling out of the country, you know, that was a big shell shock. You know, it was like, wow, it doesn't quite work out as easy as we imagined it to, but you know, we had a good team there that year. Jim Grew was our coach, and he speaks, I don't know how many languages, but every dinner, 40 people deep,
Wow.
sat there and walked behind every single person, would order for us, and by the end of the trip, we were there for almost 2 weeks. By the end of the trip, we had figure out how to get ourselves to McDonald's and point at a menu and at least get some of the food that we wanted.
Right.
But that was a shell shock. But for me, I loved it. I thrived off it.
Yeah.
And being in what some might consider an uncomfortable situation, I thought it was great because I want to try to figure out how can I make friends with this person that I have zero communication ability with
right.
language wise, and I loved it.
Nice.
It was great.
So, if my memory doesn't fail me, you must have been 15 when you won those Worlds. 16, 15?
I was young. I skied in 2 junior worlds. I skied, and I have a good birthday. So I would have been, for junior worlds, I have a good birthday. So I was 15 and 17 when I skied my 2 juniors.
And did you win both?
I won both.
Yeah. That's so rare.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
So I came in, I qualified for my first Worlds in France, and then we went to, I want to say Lima, Peru.
Yep.
Was our next Worlds, and I won one jump there, and I was still competing heavily in overall at the time, and I remember I came up, Martin Coleman beat me in overall by just a little bit, man. Just squeaked me out by like 10 points. And I kind of got my fire fueled for overall there because I was a really talented overall skier. I couldn't pull it off. I always got, you know, I went down one flip too early, or I was a half a buoy short, or a foot and jump too short. Never won an overall title, even at nationals. I competed against Storm Seltzer my whole life, and he was always, you know, just
the overall guy.
Just the overall guy, right ahead of me. Never could win an overall title.
But you got second behind Martin at Worlds.
I got second behind Martin, and that was my last junior Worlds. And I think I'd skied the under 21s the very following year, which were in Chile. Yep. So we were in Chile then, and I was a bad birthday then, but I skied my 17-year-old under 21s, and I skied my 19-year-old under 21s, and I was eligible for my last one, but I ended up turning pro, and I I committed to jump by then.
Yeah.
And I went off.
And I'm assuming you, if I'm not mistaken, you won in Chile as a 17-year-old.
Yeah, I won Chile. I was at 5.5. That was that year that Jack wanted to let me. That same mentality, not going up to 6 foot yet, because we can compete at 35 6 foot. And that was actually, that Junior Worlds was very beginning of January. We were down there for New Year's, and that was actually my first jump over 200 feet. I think I went 202, like 202 or 203, right at 61 meters, and ended up winning jump down there. That one, I was a heavy underdog for that one, and a couple guys had a crash, another guy got, but I came out on top on that one, and skied really well, and then we went to the under 21 Worlds, would have been next in Mexico.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of everything came together for me. I jumped really amazing for that site. I went like 217 down there, and
unbelievable.
Ran 5 at 38 or 5.5 at 38. I tied my PB again. I was 7,500 points. Solid every day, and but that was my first and my only major overall tournament I ever won, as I won the under 21 Worlds in
Mexico. In overall.
Yep.
That's true.
Yep.
That's true.
So it was, at that time, I had just started my freshman year of college.
Yeah.
And I knew that overall wasn't going to pan out forever, but I still did it for my collegiate team. And I still did it because my parents were, they were still pushing me in overall. They wanted to see overall success. And I won the under 21 Worlds. And at that point, I said, I sold my toe ski at the Worlds.
At the Worlds.
I never did toes again. That was my last time that my toe has ever been inside a handle. And I remember I got back from Worlds and back from Collegiate Nationals. It was all kind of together. And I told my dad I was done doing toes. In college now, I'm only going to do one pass. I'm going to do hands. And, I was scared. I was scared of toes. I'd gotten drugged a couple times before rope release was around. I was intimidated by it. And because of that, I struggled to excel in it. And I remember he came back and he said, all right, well, your toe ski will be perfect for your sister. So when you come down for summer break, bring your toe ski and bring your hard shell, and we'll get your sister set up on that. And I said, oh, actually, that's still that's in Mexico. I sold that at the tournament. Oh man, but that didn't go over well. Because at the time my parents were still paying for all my ski stuff, and I definitely wasn't getting any trick sponsors, any free gear there. But I sold it at those Worlds, and I figured I'd hang my hat on an under 21 overall title, and that was
that was a good way to finish.
That was a good way to finish.
Look, before we take a little break, I just have one episode that I remember, and I'm sure you recall this. It might have been, actually, for sure, it was before those Worlds in Mexico. It was a tournament at McCormick's at the end of 2008. Mm-hmm. And you went stupid big at 5.5. I want to say either 225 or 229, something crazy.
Yeah.
And I remember being on the dock as not that good of a jumper, getting ready. And you're the only guy I've ever seen in that jump going up, going down, going up again, and then landing. Yeah. And I remember that the boat had to do something funny for you not to hit the island because the McCormick's was kind of short. Was that the moment in which Jack was keeping you at 5? Because I remember it was at 5.5. But was Jack keeping you there and you were feeling like you were ready?
I had been, so I remember the tournament very well. I had skied, even though I was in Boys 3 at the time, I had skied the international men division had just kind of started to come out. And so I had skied international men, so it would still count for an open men's score. And I'd gone 35. I was still skiing 32 at the time, but I was skiing a lot more 35, and I dropped back down to ski 32 for Boys 3 events in the U.S. And it was a beautiful headwind down there, and Les Todd was driving, and I got a hold of at the time, that was my biggest jump I'd ever had. I'd had a 217 that I had done earlier in the year. I had one of those at Jack's, and I had another one at McCormick's. But this was all at 5.5, and Jack was still not yet. This was the dog at the door on the leash kind of deal. And then October that year, I had gone connected on a huge jump, and I went 228, 69.5 meters.
I remember.
It's still the my little claim to fame. Even though it's not an official world record by any means, it's still the longest jump off a 5.5 foot ramp.
Wow.
And I just, everything, I connected so well with that jump, and I got my first lift and my first gust, and I started coming back down for what would have been probably a 215 jump. And then as I started my descent almost, I caught a second gust, and it re-raised me. You can see it in the video.
Yep.
And it's very clear, and it's just like this double gust jump, and I landed, and I'd never gone that big before. And
Right.
So I kind of landed, stuck my landing, and at McCormick's, it's a very short turnaround time, and I think I caught the driver. I caught Les off guard. He didn't expect me to go that big. I didn't expect to go that big. And I remember, like, I slammed on the brakes and kind of skied up on the corner of the island, and then Les had to pull way off to tighten the rope up for me. And, you know, I think I passed on my next jump. I was too excited. But, I mean, that was a huge moment in my career. I remember all the open skiers who were going 6 foot were going right after me.
Yep.
And I was the last guy at 5.5. And so to have all the pros there to kind of witness that jump and see that and kind of encourage me, and then at the same time, you know, kind of,
What the hell?
you know, kind of what the hell, kind of, you know, busting my chops a little bit for it, you know, like, you know, at that point I was like, I got to go 6 foot, man, and I did.
Okay, so after that
So
tournament,
that was my last 5.5 foot tournament. You know, on purpose. You know, I had some injuries later on that I skied 5.5 for, but that was my last official 5.5 tournament. And I was like, it's time to go. Time to go 6 foot.
Did Jack give you the thumbs up?
I think Jack at that point, there was no. I had broken the leash.
Okay.
He's like, okay, I think you've proven your point. You've gone far enough at 5.5 now, because I think at the time, I mean, the 5.5 record for the U.S. was 217, which was kind of the standing U.S. record. I know was men's 135, 5.5. Where everybody else was in the world, I know Dodd had gone 6 foot pretty early in his career, but he had a couple big jumps at 5.5, like, you know, high teens. But you know, to go that big at 5.5, it was all right.
It's pretty.
It's time. It's time. So
sorry to stay. I'm gonna stay with that tournament because I remember it shocked me. So the two things that shocked me about that tournament were you taking the second lift, something I'd never seen before, nor have I seen again to that extent, because I think you described it well. The second thing that stuck with me in that tournament was that there was a Mastercraft and a Nautic, right?
Yep.
And they asked us, hey, what do you guys want to ski? What do you want to jump behind? And I saw everyone saying Nautic. But at the time, I was skiing a lot at Bennett's.
Yep.
So I said Mastercraft. And they said, are you sure? Are you damn sure? I'm like, yeah, I want to ski behind a Mastercraft. And then I see Freddie rolling up with his Mastercraft. Yeah. And then I realized why people were asking me, are you sure, right? So it was a super powerful boat. I dropped however many letters. I had my nice little jump set. I think it was like late 80s, early 90s. And then, because it was only the two of us jumping with the Mastercraft, after me, he went.
Yeah.
And I remember, and that's the first time I experienced the intensity of the guy on the dock. You know, like, put his bindings on, take the rear view mirror out, Judge, you sit here, the rope here, the switch there. Like, the guy was so intense, and he shocked me. And then he boosted a big one. I don't think it was a world record, but he was really going big. It was chasing.
Yep.
And that's the other thing that I recall from that McCormick's tournament that shocked me, like experiencing Freddy Krueger, like about to ski at an event. Yeah. You know, I say all of this because I wonder, you as obviously an American skier growing up, you must have had that picture right there, you know?
Yeah. So that was kind of around the same time that I actually started sharing the dock with Freddie a little bit. Maybe not back-to-back skiers, but seeing his warm-up process and seeing how he was doing it, and this is, I think, where I maybe strayed a little bit different from the path. I'm very lighthearted and easygoing on the dock and stuff, but seeing Freddie's dedication that he put into every single set, for me, I was like, oh man, if I want to compete, I need to probably reel in my antics a little bit and try to focus and really kind of study this a little bit more. I've gotten to this point. I don't want to call it lucky, but I've gotten to this point. I've had some really great success, but I haven't been humbled yet. And I never really had to experience that, that humble pie. I was fortunate enough, but I think because I was able to see people like Freddie and, later on see people like Dodd that were just so laser focused and intense. And I was like, man, I gotta reel myself back in a little bit, and I don't have to totally follow in these guys' footsteps, but I need to acknowledge what they're doing and try to take bits of that and apply it to my style. And that's when I kind of reeled it back in, but then, I still stayed true to myself and was a fun guy to be around on the dock and kept it pretty lighthearted. But 30 seconds before, as soon as skis went on, mindset turned to a completely different animal on the water.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of that from seeing guys like Freddie.
Yeah.
And his intensity on the dock.
Because, I'm assuming, growing up, I would imagine that by the time you were in your juniors and a bit earlier, Freddie was already big. He was jumping big, winning events, setting world records. So, as a fellow American skier, I'm sure that was set as an example, right?
Yep.
But I wonder, you might have already answered this, but I wonder how it was to go from, oh my God, he's so good, he's the best there is, to now I'm going to compete against this guy.
I'll, very first tournament that on a pro scene, so we had some, backyard tournament. We had tournaments here at Jack's where I competed in the same division as him. And I had tournaments at McCormick's and a couple things like that. The very first big one that I had was LA Night Jam in 2000. It would have been 2008. And it was, I think, the second year they had done the tournament, maybe the third. But it was the first time they had a big cash prize.
Yeah.
Night jump. Night jump was just coming onto the scene. I'd never night jumped before, and I had skied my ass off in prelims and made the finals. And I had ended up getting seeded. I was third seed going into the final. So it was everyone else was skiing, and then it was me, then it was Jarrett Llewellyn, and then it was Freddie Krueger.
Wow.
Boom, boom, boom. Top three. And of course they're hyping it up on the mic, top three, and I'm like, I'm not top three here, man. This is my first pro event. I skied well in prelims, and that's when it kind of all hit me like, well, maybe I am top three now. And I went out there, and my very first jump, I kicked the crap out of it. It was a huge jump, but I never night jumped before. I had no idea what to expect. And I pressed, and I pressed, and I pressed, and I belly flopped on my landing and just absolutely ate it. Came up, Bennett's is a little shallow on the landings. I had mud all over my skis, rung my bell a little bit, oh my God, that was so embarrassing because I am in the middle of this pack of the top 6 jumpers. I'm right there in the middle, and I can't ride out a jump.
Yeah.
And I ended up skiing myself into the lead on one of my next jumps, and Jarrett and Freddie had gone out, and I think they'd gone out for a jump off. They had tied really close, but it was kind of up for debate, and they went out, and Jarrett called out Freddie and was like, hey man, double or nothing basically. Let's go head to head again real quick. And Freddie ended up coming out on top, but that was my first podium I ever made as a pro skier, and I got to be on the podium with Freddie and Jarrett and myself. And
That's a big podium.
I was a big podium, and it's funny. Jarrett was in my pro skiing career of kind of my 10 years in there. Jarrett had some injuries and some crashes shortly after I had come on to the scene. So we only shared about 2 years of the tour together. But he was the only pro skier, like a guy that I idolized. I had his jumpsuit. I bought an old speed suit off him when I was a junior, and I wore that thing like until it fell off, man. It had Camaro and not teak. I wasn't even sponsored by these companies, but I had it all over.
White and red.
The white
I remember.
and red one.
I remember.
Yep. And I idolized Jared's style and his ability. He was the only pro jumper that I never beat on tour. I never got a chance to and that was, because he had gotten out of it, and he'd come back on and skied some tournaments and stuff later on in his career. But while he was in his peak form, and then I had just come on the scene, that was a guy that I idolized and wanted to be able to take down. I never got to catch him.
Yeah. So that tells me that you have been in Freddie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So my first pro win was at King of Darkness. I forget where we were in Michigan, just outside Flint, Michigan, about an hour outside. And it was the first year they had put on this event, and the Skiers Pier local Malibu dealership had sponsored the event, and they had flown my dad up. This time he was doing some TC stuff and helping set up, so they had flown him up to help set up this place at a public park, and it was a night jump, but we only had like maybe 6 or 7 lights versus Bennett's we had 12 or 15 lights. It was a very dark setup, and this was the first time that we would do a head-to-head jump final. And so we had prelims, top 8 making in, 1 verse 8, 2 verse 7, same format that they had been doing in slalom, and we did it for jump. And
3 jumps, 2 jumps.
We did 3 jumps the first round, 2 jumps the second round, and then we changed it to do a 2 jump final.
Okay.
Just because it wasn't the best conditions, and it was a very tight setup. We had to whip out to the 6. As soon as you landed, the boat went under this bridge, and the bridge, like, you had to duck under the bridge. It was crazy. But I remember we went head to head, and I had gone up against Damian Sharman in the second round, and I just squeaked out. I think I went 2:18, just barely beat Damo. And Tom Asher and Freddie Krueger had gone out on the other side of it, and Tom went like 2:27 at night.
Wow.
On a public park lake, crazy jump. And Freddie, oh, God bless Tom, Freddie beat him by like a foot, nothing.
Wow.
So these guys had like a 2:28 and 2:29.
Yeah.
Freddie advanced, I advanced. And so now this is the first time I'm really head-to-head against Freddie on the dock. Before my other pro events, I had always been a couple before him, never after him. And so this was the first time, and his intensity on the dock, and we had Tad Schreiber there. It was, we're making a film out of it, so they were interviewing us on the dock as we're getting ready, and they were encouraging some bantering back and forth to get the crowd going, and I was amped up. 17-year-old, man. I was like so stoked, and I was getting ready to tee off against one of my idols, and at the same time I took the intensity in there, and he had the best jump going in, so he elected to send me off first, and I think I went 2:24, posted out a big jump at night, and Freddie had a decent first one. It was like 2:17, 2:19, somewhere in there. And then he slipped out on his last jump. And then I think at that point I blacked out. I was running around crazy like a chicken with my head cut off. I won my first pro event, and it was a big one. We had a ton of people on shore there. Music going, night jump. Everything revolved around the jumpers that night. It was a really cool event. And that's not something I'll never forget. That one.
Yeah, I mean
that's. I still get goosebumps talking about that one, man. That was a fun one, and Freddie, God bless him, man. He came right up to me as soon as we were done, and big hug, congratulated me, and they got us up on the podium like right after. And I had never popped a bottle of champagne before.
Okay.
And so I remember they gives me a bottle of champagne, and obviously he's been in that position before and spraying that stuff, and he said, just wiggle the cork. And I remember he looks over and we're on the podium, and he's
Right.
like, hand me your ski, wiggle the cork a little bit, one shake, and do not spray me. And I said, yes, sir. and sure enough, the cork came out, and I sprayed the champagne, and he sat there, and there's a great photo of kind of my ski leaning up against Freddie. He kind of grabbed my check for me. He gave us the big checks, and me popping a bottle of champagne, and Freddie and Tom Asher
Right there.
sitting there on the podium with me. But those were two guys that had been in the sport for a long time that were super cool with me winning, and very, Freddie wrote me a really nice email after that.
Oh, wow.
Just very, I can't remember quite the details of it, but I remember it well, that he sent me a very kind email just congratulating me, welcome to the scene, and I'm not going to let that happen again. But,
Yeah.
yeah,
that's
welcome.
good. That's good.
So that's what I love about Jump, man, is all these guys, we get along.
Yeah.
We get along so well, man.
That's what I was going to say. Like, I don't know that if you want a pro event in slalom in a head-to-head, the person you beat in the head-to-head final will send you an email congratulating you,
Yeah, and that's
a bit of a different vibe.
I think that's what I love about Jump, and I love our community, is we're a smaller group than the slalom skiers are. Slalom on any given day, there's your top group, but there's 20, 30 of you guys traveling to these events, whereas Jump, we were 10 to 15 guys at best.
Yeah.
And we were a little too small, and we relied on each other a little too much to be able to kind of create too much animosity between us. So, we traveled together to all tournaments. We shared rental cars, and if someone else won for about 10 minutes, I'd be pissed off about it.
Right.
And then I'd come around and say, "Hey, man, I got a cold 6-pack in the back of the truck.
Let's
you
go.
Get the first one. Congratulations, and I'll get you to the next stop." And it was great camaraderie amongst us, and it pushed all of us.
Yeah.
I think when I came onto the scene, it helped relight a fire under Freddie and Dodd and some of those guys, because we've been coasting for a little bit, and it was the same group, and then I was the first new one in about a 5-7 year span. A couple of guys had kind of started getting out of it, like Jimmy Seamers wasn't in it as much. Curtis Shears wasn't quite competing as much, but there wasn't really a lot of new guys coming in, and I came in, and they didn't let me get away with doing anything easy, or
Right.
made sure I was a new guy on tour, but they welcomed it, welcomed the push, and
That's cool.
it made us all better.
That's a really cool story.